Hi everyone, I'm Professor Athanasios Saratzis. I'm based in Leicester in the UK, and I'm part of the Paris Vascular Insights social team. It is my real pleasure to spend a few minutes presenting an update on randomized controlled trials in early summer 2025, especially trials relating to peripheral artery disease here in the UK. And I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about some existing big randomized controlled trials and a couple of upcoming studies, all of which are funded by the NIHR and the British Heart Foundation. So I hope this will be informative, and most importantly, I hope you will open your site for recruitment wherever you are in the UK. And please join us in Paris next year in order to talk about these trials and discuss their delivery and their findings. So let's start with a couple of basic things. Efficacy-driven RCTs are very common in vascular surgery. And when we're talking about efficacy-driven RCTs, we're talking about usually industry-funded projects with small numbers of patients and selection criteria that are not very inclusive. And to give you an example about what I'm really trying to refer to here, we did a study called Random Stop a couple of years ago, and we involved 20 centers across Europe and 1,500 patients who had presented with CLTI. You can look at our publication on the European Journal from about 18 months ago. And what we looked was all the efficacy-driven randomized controlled trials that had assessed paclitaxel therapies in peripheral artery disease. And these were the 7 key studies that we identified, all randomized controlled trials, fairly small studies. And we tried to assess whether these 1,500 patients from the 20 centers across Europe could have taken part in any of these efficacy-driven RCTs to see whether we could indeed extrapolate results from these RCTs. And we found that 82% of patients seen in daily practice would actually not be eligible for randomization in any of these 7 efficacy-driven randomized controlled trials, because none were powered or designed to assess whether the treatment actually works or not. And as a result, they had very exclusive criteria in terms of who could and could not take part. Now, when it comes to big effectiveness trials, these trials are doing something very different. They're looking at big populations, and they're powered on things like amputations, amputation-free survival, etc., when it comes to PAD. Now, unfortunately, in other areas of cardiovascular medicine, like stroke or coronary artery disease, we've had dozens, if not hundreds even, of these major effectiveness-driven randomized controlled trials published over the years. But there's only been 3 studies in the last 20 years or so when it comes to chronic limb-threatening ischemia. But this is changing. The NIHR and the British Heart Foundation in the UK have now funded several big effectiveness-driven randomized controlled trials that you can see on your screens. These trials are looking at whether people are less likely to die or suffer an amputation after we offer them a certain treatment that relates to their PAD. And they range from trials like EVOCC, where we're comparing open versus endovascular treatment for aortoiliac disease, to new studies like LIDAPAD, where we're comparing colchicine to placebo in patients that have got PAD, or even a number of amputation-related trials. HAMLET is one of them, for example. It's about to open in a few months in the UK, comparing below and above knee amputations. Now, these are the key PAD trials in the UK that are open or about to open for randomization across the NHS. EVOCC, comparing open and endovascular treatment for aortoiliac disease. KID, which is looking at CO2 versus standard contrast for angioplasties. Clarity and LIDAPAD, which are looking at medical therapy in patients who have got PAD. And RAVE and RAF. RAVE and RAF are quite important because they've only just been funded. RAVE is comparing the use of lithotripsy versus no lithotripsy in patients with PAD. And finally, RAF is looking at open versus endovascular treatments for common femoral artery disease. So there's essentially a major effectiveness-driven randomized control trial to answer every question when it comes to PAD care, and that includes claudication and CLTI. And these trials are open across all sites that offer vascular services in the UK. So if you haven't opened your site for recruitment yet, please do get in touch and we can essentially take care of all the paperwork and all the bureaucracy so that we can indeed take part and change the future of vascular care. Because at the end of the day, it is our duty to recruit in well-designed randomized controlled trials.